I don't know.
Is this open for some reason?
All right, I think we're live. I'll send everybody the link here. All righty. Some crazy times out there. If anybody listening to this live stream is in need of any supplies for life or cleanliness, let us know. We'll be sure to get you what you need. We don't want anybody to be without. Let's see. I gotta remember where I'm going. I've been coming and going all day. Okay. Alright, let's see.
I'm going to town.
Oh, Karen, you're a mess.
I know it. What would you do without me, though?
I would go hungry.
Well,
It kind of looks like a light blue, doesn't it? It looks to me like,
you're probably
like
too.
soap, dishwash, I mean, like clothes powder, soap, or something like that, or common. You know, that they, is this Karen, is this somebody's spoon?
No, I don't think so. No, it was down there. You know what? Just like this coffee thing. You clean it up and then you come back and it's a mess.
Alright.
Again.
Alright, you should have the link here. I'll get it set up. Alrighty. Use the bathroom.
Look there, this sure looks better. This thing, all of it. Well, they don't wait up there, rinse it, or. No, that's it. Just rinse it down. And these stuff would be such a mess.
Just kind of wonder if anybody appreciates you doing it. Clean it up.
Karen, was this yours?
No, Josh got it from underneath my thing or something.
There's some still out there.
This coffee pot needs to be moved too. Really. The walls even need to be cleaned.
I don't think it could be done in here, painted.
Oh, yeah. Did you see him,
Who?
Alex?
No, but he said thank you very much. It was,
Okay.
he was very excited.
I got my purse sitting in front of the screen.
I wonder if there's a broom back there where I could sweep that out a little bit. So I could pick it up.
Oh, I'm gonna start carrying a little portable heater.
Yeah. We freeze down here all the time.
cold
Sorry.
in here.
You can always turn it up.
Who's got beans sitting here?
Me? Sorry. I forgot about
Hasn't got
that.
to eat all.
You want me to throw them or you want them?
I'll leave them there. I'll leave
Okay.
'em. Yeah, I'm remembering lots of energy.
Karen,
Yep, she's coming.
get in the broom, she wants to sweep up under
Oh.
the
Yeah. Oh, got the,
Unless it's just on the other side of the camera. Josh, the sack for you.
Oh, okay, thanks.
No little brooms.
well, just don't worry about it then.
I hate to have cornbread all over the floor. I wish we could see them.
Yeah, just don't have the technology or the bandwidth to do that.
Is that your new?
You can't have Skype?
Well, the issue with Skype is then we could only do it with one other person. And there's multiple people who watch it.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, because we're broadcasting, we're not just communicating with one person, but we're actually communicating with everybody who wants to watch.
Okay.
That's the way it has to be. The technology to do a group Skype would be 10 times what we have.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, just not realistic. But they can actually type to us. If they type, it'll show up on the right-hand side of the screen. So anybody who's watching, if you want to say something to us, you can type in the chat section and we'll see it.
Oh, okay.
So that is an option. When Alex was teaching the other week, I watched just a teeny bit of it, and because I was at the election thing, and I actually wrote some comments.
Did you?
Yeah,
Bad or good?
of course, good.
We didn't see them then, right?
Well, you have to pay attention.
Oh,
They're not
yeah.
going to highlight. You just got to read them as they come across. So.
And they don't stay there, they just,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, huh,
Yep. Good times.
that's interesting.
All right. Well, I thought today would be the perfect opportunity
Oh,
to talk about what the Bible has to say about situations like this.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and the truth is, the Bible was way ahead of science when it came to this kind of thing. In fact,
Things driving me nuts.
all the way back in Leviticus chapter 13, we have instructions about quarantining and cleanliness. Leviticus, it's the third book of your Bible.
Oh, the third one.
The first 5 books of the Bible written by Moses, and he wrote them all, together more or
Sorry,
less.
what was the chapter?
13. Leviticus 13. And think about that. The very first book of the Bible is Genesis, talking about the beginning of time. And the first 5 books were all written by Moses and were all given by God. And to this day, they are accurate and still useful for understanding even situations like this. So I thought we would take a look at how God handled these kinds, or wanted us to handle these kind of infections. And it turns out if we follow the same guidelines, we tend to be okay too. So kind of cool, huh?
Yes.
I'd say.
So, yep, Leviticus 13. I'll give everybody time to get there. We don't go to Leviticus all that often.
well,
So,
I can't turn the pages, I can't
I-
separate the pages.
I can't either. I have the awfulest time with my fingers.
you're fine. Take your time.
I've got
You're
it.
there?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody there? It's fine. We got time. We're not in any rush. All right. Well, in Leviticus chapter 13, starting in verse 1, it's God talking to Moses and Aaron and describing leprosy in particular, but then it branches out from there. So, Would somebody read Leviticus chapter 13, verses 1 through 4?
And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man has on the skin of his body a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes on the skin of his body like a leprous sore, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. How far?
2 more verses.
The priest shall examine the sore on the skin of his body, and if the hair on the sore has turned white, and the sore appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous sore. Then the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body, and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and its hair has not turned white, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the sore for 7 days.
All right. Thank you, Shirley. So, sounds like pretty common knowledge. Somebody has an infection, and you can determine medically that it is an infection. Not a good idea for those people to be around other people. What do we still do to this day, even with all our modern medicine?
We don't call it, what is it?
Isolate.
Unclean? We don't call them unclean.
Well, sure, maybe not that particular word, but we
But
say
they
they're
can-
ill or they're sick, and we say stay away from them.
Yeah,
Are they,
isolate
what,
them.
contagious?
Yeah.
They're contagious.
Yep, stay away, right? And notice how there's 2 different instructions here. If the person really does have leprosy, he's declared sick. But even if he doesn't have leprosy, is there still precautions to take?
For 7
Yeah,
days.
because he still has something there. It says, he who has the infection. So notice how the Bible even knows the difference between a specific disease and general infection. Pretty neat, huh?
Yes.
So let's keep reading. Verse 5.
The priest shall look at him on the 7th day, and if his eyes, the infection has not changed, and the infection has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 more days. How far did you
Yeah,
say?
that's perfect.
Okay.
So I want you to notice something. What do you see right now, the CDC saying? How many days should we stay in groups under 10?
I didn't know.
14.
14.
And what does exactly it say here?
14.
14.
7 and 7.
Now, come on, isn't that amazing? 3,500
Yeah,
years
my
ago?
Gosh,
Isn't that crazy?
yes.
It's amazing.
It is.
Yeah. And because notice, it's just the person who's sick and the priest. So it's a small group, very small group, examining this issue over time. And when you deal with things like certain strains of the flu, when you deal with a common cold, when you deal with coronavirus, whatever it is, we still do not have cures for these things. The only cure is what?
Rest and
Quarantine
water
and rest. Yeah.
Water.
3,500 years ago, God already knew that. Isn't that something? I tell you, the Word of God's amazing.
I'll have to point that out to Kate.
Yeah, it is. It's really something. All right. So let's read verse 6 now.
The priest shall look at him again on the 7th day, and if the infection has faded and the mark has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean.
All right. Now, isn't that cool too? Because right now we're not just concerned with people having infection, but can you touch a surface and maybe put the virus on a surface or on your clothing or something else? Absolutely.
Wash your clothing and be clean.
Yeah.
That's why you have to wash your hands all the time.
Right. And I'm going to show you here in just a little bit on how when you're dealing with something even worse than leprosy, can you imagine that? But something even worse than leprosy, how they don't just clean the clothes, they actually get rid of them entirely. Because there are times where you just get rid of something.
Well, what was it back in, what was that? Was it the bubonic plague or something where they burned the clothes? They took everything that was in that household. If they all died, they took everything and burned it.
Yep. It's
And
not
a
worth it.
lot of those contagious disease, they used to burn the bodies too. So-
Yeah, right.
Yep. All right. Now we could keep reading forever, but I want you to notice that most of 13 it just keeps going, right? Like we've already read several verses, but there's like, there's dozens more. And that's because God gives very specific instructions if it's leprosy or another infection, how to quarantine, how to make sure they have what they need, and how to get the person better. Now, this is something I talked about in the sermon a little bit on Sunday, but think about it. If we don't have medicine or vaccines for these problems, but we can solve it through quarantine and rest, where is the cure? It's in us. It just takes time for it to happen. Our bodies are designed by God to fight off these things. But it requires staying away from other people and rest, food, water. In fact, that's why throughout entire Jewish history, there were leprosy camps and other places where sick people went, and they would stay in isolation, and people would bring them food and water, and they would rest. They didn't have to work, and they just waited it out. And it worked.
A lot of times weren't they like caves and that?
Well, there were times when the Israelite nation got away from God's instruction and didn't treat those people very well.
I thought they,
Yeah, there's,
unless a family member would bring them food
Right.
and leave it or something for them.
But that's not the way the law of God was laid out.
Okay.
They were supposed to take care of them.
I see.
And a good society does that, right? A good society takes care of its poor and its
So we have
elderly.
nursing homes and stuff.
Right. Yeah. And it turns out that our system of nursing homes, although it has its positives and negatives, in this situation is really a positive. Because if all these people were still living in everybody's family homes, it could get real bad real fast. And that's what's happened in Italy to some degree. Is
Oh,
that
really?
most people in Italy, they live in their family home until death. Well, that's admirable in many ways. In situations like this, it's a really bad idea.
Did you know the Philippines is the same way?
Yep.
They don't have nursing homes.
Right. So there's a positive and negatives to everything. In this one case, it's a positive.
I did see that I don't know what, Italy's, he's the leader, prime minister, whatever it was, over Italy, and I think another portion of another country, asked the people to stay home, but he said, and they showed videos of people were standing, because there were so many that live in these tall apartment things, and they're open to the outside.
Oh,
They
yeah.
all stood on the outside, and they were singing and playing and music, and
Yeah.
to cheer each other. They said, his idea was that they'd cheer people up since everybody's kind of downcast and upset with
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
I saw that too.
I thought
It's a
that
great
was
idea.
great idea.
2020.
I got a
wasn't it?
point to
Yeah.
say,
Okay.
which is not real important. But you know where they have the food, the whatever you call it, where they hand out food
Mm-hmm.
on that corner.
Commodities or?
On that corner,
Commodities?
huh?
Other commodities.
The commodity. There used to be it called the old folks home there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Two or three story.
Yeah.
It was the spookiest looking place.
Yeah, and it was not the best.
No,
Did you
it
ever go
wasn't.
in it?
Yeah, never did, don't
I
worry.
did.
Well, we used to have to go there and sing. at
Did you
Christmas in
really?
school, and the odor was horrible.
Oh.
I can still smell it.
I can remember 1966. I was without a job when I first moved to Minnesota. And the first thing that opened up was a nursing home. I thought, I can do this, isn't gonna bother me a bit. Oh my, when I first opened up those doors and walked in there and that odor just about turned my stomach. But I
That's why
took the
nursing
job and I
homes
worked
bother
until I
me, I
had something
think.
else, but
No one
every
ever-
night, as soon as I got out of there, I went straight to the shower and scrubbed my head and, oh.
All right. Let me take you all the way down to verse 43.
Okay,
Like I said, we're going to skip a lot because it just has a lot to do with specific instructions with regards to various,
like boils and all, I
yeah.
was looking.
Yeah.
But just
mothballs.
notice, this almost
Burn.
reads like a medical book. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but it just reads like a medical dictionary. If this, then that. If this, then that. And that's amazing. All right. So let's go all the way down to verse 43. And somebody read verses 43 and all the way through 45.
Then the priest shall examine it, and indeed, if the swelling of the sore is reddish white on his bald head, or on his bald forehead, as the appearance of leprosy on the skin of the body, he is a leprous man. He is unclean. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean. His sore is on his head. Now the leper on whom the sore is, his clothes shall be torn and his head bare, and he shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean.
All right, very good. Now, this sounds pretty miserable.
Yeah.
And you know what? Sickness is miserable. So the
Yeah,
Bible
but
is,
they have to go around and say, I mean,
Well,
you're
you
saying,
really-
I'm unclean,
you wouldn't go
unclean."
around. You'd only be saying this to people who would approach you. Because
Okay.
you're under quarantine,
Okay.
you know, so understand that. And again, this cry of unclean, unclean, we often would think, well, this is them sort of saying something negative about themselves. I see this as more of, they don't want anybody else to get infected. I mean, if you had coronavirus, wouldn't you tell everybody,
Stay
away from me?
You don't want this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not saying I'm a terrible person. You're saying I don't want you to have what I have. And that's perfectly reasonable. And there's nothing quite like unclean, unclean that'll get your attention.
Yes, very quickly.
So, you know, it's the Bible's way, it's that culture's way of dealing with this problem. And it is correct. We still do this to this day, even if we use different terminology, different language. All right. Now I'm going to read verse 46 here. He shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Now, notice it says he shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. Now, doesn't that make sense? Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Now, in some cases, leprosy was permanent. And in that case, it was horrific. It was terrible. Are there some diseases that are permanent? Yeah.
Yes,
There are.
yes.
That's a real thing. Now, there are other times, and we have these stories throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, where a leper would become clean, either through natural time, God's natural healing process, or through a miracle. So there was a way for them to get out if it would clear up. And that's the exact same thing we do today. There's a lot of things we can diagnose, but we can't fix. You've probably noticed that if you go to the doctor, right? They'll tell you have this condition. There's no cure. All there is management. That's the exact same thing. Isn't that amazing? 3,500 years later, a lot of these things still
your
apply.
poor hands.
Yeah, well, 500 million times using the
Stuff.
cleaner will do that. Yeah.
I'm sorry I touched it.
Oh, you're fine. All right. Now, I'm going to read 47 and on here. When a garment has a mark of leprosy on it, whether it is a wool garment or a linen garment, whether in warp or woof of a linen or of wool, whether in leather or in any article made of leather, if the mark is greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather, or in the warp or in the woof, or in any article of the leather, it is a leprous mark and shall be shown to the priest. Then the priest shall look at the mark and shall quarantine the article with the mark for 7 days. He shall then look at the mark on the 7th day. If the mark has spread in the garment, whether in the warp or in the woof, in the leather, or whatever purpose for which the leather is used, the mark is a leprous malignancy, it is unclean. So he shall burn the garment, whether the warp or the woof, in the wool or in linen, or any article of leather in which the mark occurs, for it is a leprous malignancy. It shall be burned in the fire. The reason why I decided to read that is because notice how repetitious it is. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes when you make announcements that are really important,
You make them 2 or 3 times?
yes. Like, this is really bad. Like, and here's the deal, right? Somebody might say, oh, it could infect wool, but not leather. You could see somebody doing that, because people do that all the time. They make exceptions for things. Or it's a special piece of clothing that was maybe given to them. It was a gift. You know, they'll do anything to try to save it. But what's God saying here? No matter
Get rid of it.
what it is, if it's got this problem, you gotta burn it. And is God right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that also teaches us that we shouldn't get too attached to stuff.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Come and look at my house.
It's nothing but, stuff.
It's just stuff.
I
We
know.
just get so attached.
But sometimes attachment to stuff is because of memories, like things that I have were my parents or my grandparents, and those things, it's not because there's any value to them.
Right.
It's value to me because of the memories.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
But if you would make that a higher value than an infection it might carry,
Yeah.
that's God's point here.
Yeah,
There is a point in time where sentimentality plays a lower role than safety.
But I can see these things that I don't know what the woof is, but the linen weave is coarse and open, so the germs would grow in them. And I believe because leather is a animal
Animal.
product, that it would grow in them.
I
So
would
that,
think so too.
so I assume whatever the woof means,
Well, and you know that they didn't have synthetic material
Yeah,
back then.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
obviously everything they had came from some kind of
Yes,
natural source.
yes.
So, yep. So I just find that fascinating that God's like, I'm going to be super thorough here. I'm going to repeat myself a million times so you get it. When it comes to this, you got to burn it. And I'm sure there were some very sad moments when somebody had to burn something they really didn't want to burn.
Maybe they didn't have any more clothes.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say that may have been the case
Well,
too.
yeah.
But just notice how thorough God is here. One other thing I want to point out to you, back in verse 43, it talked about the bald head. That's because earlier on in the chapter, they would look for infections, not just where it was visible, where the skin is unclothed, but they would shave to find infection. Which, do some people have really thick hair and it's hard to see the
Oh,
skin?
my goodness,
Yeah.
look at yours.
So,
I'm
My hair's
jealous.
not what it used to be.
well, the point is that
I'm jealous.
they knew to look everywhere for infection. So God would, He told them outright, because you could see, for cultural reasons, people be like, well, I don't see anything, you're good. But the priest, just like a doctor, has to be willing to look anywhere. And you know that was uncomfortable.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, regardless of what culture you're in,
Especially women.
the priests were all men. So can you imagine a guy bringing his wife
Yes.
and the priest being like, oh, I don't want to do this. It's not like it was a pleasure to shave somebody's head and to look all over their body, especially since they could have the infection. You don't want to be near it.
No.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They were in a
In a
very
bad
hazardous
place.
Yeah.
position. and
Well, and think about doctors today. Are some of our healthcare workers right now getting this
Very
infection?
much so.
Yes. Yes, they're exposed to it. And in fact, there's 2 emergency room doctors on opposite coast of our nation right now who are in critical condition with coronavirus.
Well, I heard on the news that they've had such a thing about the shortages on the masks and things. They said, I think maybe it's the president that said this, that one of the reasons for was the medical ones. Every time they did one of those tests, they had to remove everything afterwards because it makes you cough or sneeze when they put that thing that go up your nose, and it will make you either cough or sneeze. Where's that going to come to the person that's doing it? So
Yep.
they have to strip everything off and then, well, out of
Gargle.
bounds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe gargle.
It's really something, isn't it? Well, just to kind of finish up here, because we don't want to go much past 2. Skip to
No, we
chapter
don't.
14. All right? Chapter 14. And this is continuing this conversation. And by the way, it goes on for a while. We're by no means covering all of it. But it's really amazing how God has this all laid out. All right? So I'm going to read here, chapter 14, starting in verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This shall be the law of the leper in the day of his cleansing. Now he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out to the outside of the camp. Thus the priest shall look, and if the infection of the leprosy has been healed in the leper, then the priest shall give orders to take 2 live clean birds and cedar wood and scarlet string and hyssop for the one who is to be cleansed. The priest also gives orders to slay the one bird in an earthenware vessel over running water. As for the live bird, he shall take it together with the cedar wood and the scarlet string and the hyssop, and shall dip them in the live bird in the blood of the bird that was slain over the running water. He shall then sprinkle 7 times the one who is to be clean from the leprosy, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the live bird go free over the open field. The one to be cleansed shall then wash his clothes and shave off all his hair and bathe in water and be clean. Now afterward he may enter the camp, but he shall stay outside his tent for 7 days.
Outside, huh?
And it will be
Outside his tent.
Yeah, he can go in the camp, but he can't go in his tent yet, otherwise his home. And it will be on the 7th day that he shall shave off all his hair. He shall shave off his head and his beard and his eyebrows, even all his hair. He shall then wash his clothes and bathe his body in water and be clean. Now on the 8th day he is to take 2 male lambs without defect, and a yearling ewe, lamb without defect, and 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, and 1 log of oil. And the priest who pronounces him clean shall present the man to be cleansed, and the aforesaid before the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Then the priest shall bring the 1 male lamb and bring it for a guilt offering with a log of oil, and present them as a wave offering before the Lord. And it goes on from there. Now, why do I bring all this up?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to explain it to you. That's a lot, right? And I read it quickly because it just keeps going. Now notice that we're still practicing good hygiene during the sacrifice God is offering them, is telling them to do. Because the guy is clean for all intents and purposes, and therefore he can go into the camp, but he still has to give it a little bit of time. Now you may ask, now if he's clean, and God knows he's clean, and the priest knows he's clean, why all this extra waiting? Well, let's say you're just, your neighbor has had leprosy for a while, and he hasn't been in town for a while, and then suddenly he's in town again. Wouldn't you like to have a little bit of assurance that he really is clean?
Yes.
I would. And wouldn't you like to know the doctor's been around to check on him a few times? I would. So these instructions are to give things a little bit of time for things to get back to normal.
Why do they have to do all those offerings?
Well,
Like the blood
well,
of the bird.
keep in mind, this is before Jesus.
Yeah.
And therefore, the offerings of the animals were a delay of the punishment of man's sin until Christ came. Christ came to pay for our sins. The animals in the Old Testament who were sacrificed didn't actually pay for the sins. They delayed the punishment.
Yeah, I knew that.
That's what they were for. And so I want you to notice, though, if you read something like this from old Egyptian text, there's no medicine that we understand. There's no quarantining as we understand. There's none of this cleansing, shaving off of the hair and cleaning the clothes or burning the clothes or any of this stuff. There's just the religious ritual. That's all there is. But here you have the religious ritual, which is for a specific purpose, to recognize this man is clean physically, but he's still a sinner like everybody else. He hasn't been able to participate in the offerings like everybody else.
All right.
And so now he's getting reintroduced into the system.
I see.
It's sort of a welcoming kind of thing back into the culture. And also, it demonstrates that he's willing to do so. And he's willing to go through all this to show his neighbors, hey, I've been certified clean, I really am clean, you've had time to witness this, I'm back into the sacrificial system, I'm a faithful Jew, you can trust this.
He's done everything physically that he needed to do,
Yep.
and he's also doing everything spiritually that he needs to do.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And isn't it true that healing is not just a physical thing? We even know this from modern science. That the emotional health, the spiritual health of people, that's why in hospice you have chaplains, that's why in hospitals you have chaplains. All of this matters. We know this. The Bible's known this the whole time. So there's so much more, and maybe some other time we'll go through it in detail, but I thought you'd find that an interesting study and a little bit of reassurance that it turns out that science is doing what the Bible says, and that makes me feel good right now. So that's why I'm perfectly fine with these short-term quarantines and things that we got to do, because that's what they did then, and it worked.
And I think that's what everybody's trying to promote now, is to keep that spread from going further. The more that they can stop from getting it, the more people that's going to quit giving it to somebody else.
Yep. What we're trying to do is flatten the curve. That's what they keep talking about.
Yeah.
Yep. And that is exactly correct. It's biblically.
What did you say the symptoms were? You said
The
coughing and...
coughing and sneezing and flu-like symptoms
Yeah,
that you would
upper
have.
That sounds
Or
like a
respiratory
cold.
breathing.
Sounds
Breathing
like
is
a cold, too.
The shortness of breath is the most concerning
That's
symptom.
the one
'cause
that
that-
scares
The
me.
what is a toilet paper? If they don't
That's
have-
called irrationality.
I thought, you know,
Yeah, but it's a necessity thing. I mean, if you've got, I still say, I know everybody's making fun of it, but I can understand a little bit. If you've got a family with a whole bunch of kids,
Yep.
and you're supposed
you've gotta have
to...
toilet paper.
And if you're stuck at home.
Oh.
Now, the thing is, you
I
need...
guess you could use magazines and
No, I couldn't.
Oh,
I see
catalogs.
2 or 3
Like
weeks
they
worth of
used to.
supplies is a really good
Yeah,
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think after this, almost everybody is going to start having some backlog, which is good. And you know what? There's another scripture, we're not going to turn to it, but 2 Chronicles chapter 7, where it says sometimes God allows these epidemics to occur to wake us up as
That's
a culture.
true.
And you know what it's doing right now?
Yeah,
It's waking us up.
It's waking
Yes,
us up that
absolutely.
things aren't always like they ought to be.
Yep.
And maybe it's me, but maybe it's just because they're talking so much about this. But I hear a little bit less fighting among people on
Yep.
television.
Yep. Well,
I mean, but it just seems like people are a little bit more lenient
Yeah,
to
the
help
picky
somebody
politics
else.
is kind
Yeah,
of gone for
yeah,
right now.
Yeah,
at least among most.
yeah, well, no,
Yeah.
I know it's not all gone, it'll
Yeah.
never be all
No.
gone, no.
No.
What I like about it,
But
Yeah.
it's down,
Yeah.
its curve is going down too.
there's
Yeah.
been so much divisiveness for so many years now.
Oh
It's
my
it's
gosh.
nice to see people just be nice to people.
Yes, yes.
And you know what? It turns out we all need toilet paper. It turns out we all need food. We all need money. We got to pay our bills. And you know, I've been really encouraged by the companies and corporations, because I'm signed up on all these email lists, about how many of them are really going out there and saying, we're going to do everything we can to help. If people are sick, we're going to pay them. If you need to stay home, stay home. They're trying to keep the panic down. And that's important, because I'd rather the private industry do that instead of the government take over. So, hey, everybody wins that way.
That's true.
Yep.
Well, and at least they're probably keeping some workers busy, giving, so there's some that's not everybody will be off of a
Oh,
paycheck.
no.
And so there needs to be some of that.
In fact, you know, your essential services are going to be double booked, really. And Amazon, for example, is hiring 100,000 temporary workers at increased wages right now to meet demand. And I know CNR and Pringers and Walmart and other places, people I know, they're working double time. I talked to a gentleman yesterday who works at one of the distribution centers, and their demand is over double right
Well, I
now.
bet my nephew is.
Yeah, he's-
Judy's son, Jeff,
Yeah.
he's been working down there for Mobley for, I don't know how many years he's been
Yeah,
there.
he says it's crazy. So, but what I like too is I'm seeing a lot of people who are being patient and waiting and being kind, and you know, there's not
There's
it's-
not pushing and shoving.
as
and
much.
trying
There
to
was, there has been some, and there will be some. But in general, most people are not panicking, which is good. And I'm glad people are calling me when they need stuff, and we're getting things out there. So our community is going to be all right.
Do you think we will always have enough? Do you think it's gonna come to it where, okay, the shelves in the grocery stores now are pretty empty?
They're picky. Yeah, they're picked over.
Very bad.
That's what Kate said. I didn't realize it got that bad since I've been to the store.
Well, yesterday when I was at Pringer's, there were some things that they were low on, and I didn't go up the toilet paper aisle, so I don't, well, I think I did look up it, and it was pretty almost, I'd say it was empty. But I noticed things like, flower shelves. There was practically no flour in there at all, and I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
You know, it's,
Well-
there's certain things that are.
But I'm just wondering.
And
you
they
know,
might
okay,
not
we're
be able
saying
to
that
get it either.
Everybody's
You don't
getting
know.
along now and being kind to each other, but if everything is gone,
Well,
what's gonna happen then?
from what I was told, I talked to a tremendous number of people these past few days because I still had lots of friends from business. You know, when I was in business, people who own the local supply lines and who oversee them, and they say supply is fine. The problem is distribution.
Getting it out there.
Yeah,
Get
I
it
mean,
to
there's
the
no real reduction in supply. It's all about distribution. When people hoard out of nowhere, that's what strains distribution. But the good news is, even the hoarders will eventually stop hoarding. And also, I'm very encouraged by this, Aldi's is cutting their business hours. Walmart supercenters are cutting their business hours. And Dollar General and some other places, and maybe even locally, I don't know yet exactly, but they're opening their first hour of the day to seniors only.
Oh, really?
And
Yeah.
that's when it should
Senior.
be the cleanest, and then there won't be
Yes.
young people in there at that time.
And they're not the ones who are going to throw fits and fight.
Yeah.
You
So
think?
that's perfect. So, you know, just common sense stuff like that is going to keep things from getting out of control.
And something I would like to add is, and I've seen several things like on Facebook, and I've even put it on, remember your local merchants shop at home if they've got it. I
Yep.
understand if they don't, you can't, but they are going to be hurting first because the local ones are the ones that get ignored on good times, and when you've got bad times, people maybe will come when they can't find it anywhere else. and
So
they'll come
when's
home.
their first, when did they open?
At 6, really, I don't know when they
Who
were
is?
gonna start that.
I didn't know who was
You mean the
it.
senior hours?
Yeah.
Dollar General's already began.
Oh,
The first hour of the day is seniors only. And
I was
as,
going to store this afternoon.
well, you can still go, you'll be
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, you do.
Macon's not crazy, at least not yet. I've been going every day, going to all the stores and just kind of keeping a radar on things. And so far, things have been, we're having some weird things like flour and toilet paper. But also, I have found, not only myself, but I've caught other people going around and asking elderly people, are you looking for something?
Well, that's nice.
I've actually seen somebody who was going around with a car full of toilet paper, finding elderly people who needed it and giving it to them. So there's helpers out there.
I don't look elderly.
Nicole
You
said
know.
yesterday
We do, these young people, I'll guarantee you, they know we're old.
over at Super Walmart in Brookfield, she said you couldn't hardly get another car in the parking lot over
Mhm.
there. And then she went up to Trenton and she stopped at the Hy-Vee store up there and she came home with $200 and some worth of groceries. But she said there was nothing like
Well,
Brookfield. There was just no place to even park.
we're a different society, and the younger people have been run and get something as you need it. You know, if I need it.
They've
you
always
run
done
and get
that,
it.
yeah.
But they aren't used to the years ago when we couldn't run.
I am concerned
All
for
the
one
time.
of my
Well,
granddaughters.
and that's the way I
She
do. I
is
stock
that
up
way.
on stuff
Half
because
the time
I
they
live
run
in the country.
McDonald's.
Well, I don't, but I still
You
force.
did,
Go to
you
the
did.
grocery
yeah.
store and get a package of buns and a little
But you know what?
package of hamburger.
Maybe God sent this epidemic to finally teach them to stop that.
Well, I hope it teaches
Stop
her
what?
something.
To stop the not having anything saved up, not having a rainy day fund, not having backups. Like I've been teaching my children, because they're teenagers and they have jobs now, that you need to have some money in backup. You can't
That's
run
right.
yourself dry and always think the next paycheck is coming. Like Harley's job at the restaurant, we don't know whether or not they'll be open. Lane's job right now is fine in the sense that drive-through and takeout is still open, but the McDonald's lobby is going to be closed.
It is.
Yeah,
Yes.
yep. Now you can still go in, but you got to leave. No sitting.
You can pick it up,
and
but
go.
you
Yep.
can't stay.
You can do it to go. And also, you can't fill your own cups anymore. The self-service
Well, that's
kiosk is
fine.
closed.
I
Yeah,
saw something in McDonald's the other day that just blew my mind, and Linda Reynolds was sitting there visiting with me and Abby. They had a young girl, she had this big pail, she was up on the ladder by the ice there, and she was digging in there with her hands and a scoop.
yep.
Taking
So-
You're
my
kidding me.
So they're avoiding
No,
all
I'm
that.
not, and Linda was about to have it.
That was-
Wow.
Well, the good news is, that's all being avoided right now. And right now, I really believe things are being done smartly. I really do. If you look at, Italy and some other places, it's really tragic and really bad. But so far, we're doing decent here. All right, let's
We
pray
are.
so Karen can leave and we all
I
want
gotta
to stay
go
and
get
talk.
my
We can.
kid.
All right. Heavenly Father, we come before you right now. We're just so thankful for this time that we've had. God, thank you for your word that gives us assurances that science has finally caught up to what you've always said. And we just pray, Lord, that we would obey what your word says, that we would listen to the authorities you put in our lives, that you would clear this epidemic quickly, that we would learn from it, and that your work and will would always be done. We pray these things in your Son's name. Amen.
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 I don't know how much it would fit, but I do know that it was one that really surprised me, and it's been more than 40 years since I read it, but the book None Such Diseases, which covers these things and how Christ, or not Christ, how the Lord promised to treat these things and why these things,
Yeah?
happens. It's got a lot of,
And what's amazing is that we actually had this information back in like 1918 during the Spanish flu, and we didn't apply it consistently. Like we've always known this because God has always told us. So now we're actually paying attention, and that's great. So when they came out yesterday and said no groups greater than 10 in 14 days, my thought was, that's biblical. That's correct.
so what are we doing about church then?
We'll know tomorrow. We're going to have a meeting with the whole board tomorrow night and discuss it. So it's unprecedented territory. So there's no obvious answer on the table at the moment. I mean, obviously, we can't have 150 people in one room. That's for sure. So how we handle it from there, I don't know, but we'll figure it out.
Does it make any difference how many would hook up on,
No.
or look up, check in there?
Nope, that's infinite.
But then there's those that don't have a computer.
Yep.
Then you have that.
At the same time, there's no such thing as 100% availability in situations like this. So no matter what we do, somebody's going to be somewhat left out. We're just going to mitigate the best we can. So we'll figure that out. We're going to talk about it tomorrow night. We're going to have no Bible study tomorrow night. We're going to meet at 7, so we have plenty of time to talk if we need to.
I will say that I was impressed by the way that communion was held.
Good.
I wished it had been explained thoroughly before we started.
That would be
I'm
my fault.
embarrassed
Yeah.
to say
That was my fault.
that I did not get any bread.
I know the
It was my
Beesons
own
didn't, they
fault.
couldn't get the 2 cups apart.
Yeah, we noticed that too. We're in a work in progress here.
I know, I
Yeah.
understood
Yeah.
that, but, and I had trouble starting, and I twisted it, and it popped loose from.
Right. Yeah.
I just thought that the bread was in the cup with the wine, you know.
Oh, no.
No.
Yeah.
I thought,
It's grape juice. Just for anybody watching.
Yeah.
I don't need that phone call later.
no,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I've had that before.
I'm sorry.
I've had angry phone calls before. Just don't say certain words. So anyway,
Yeah.
all right, very good.
But
Well,
I did think it was a sanitary way of doing it.
Yeah.
Yes, it
I just
definitely
thought
was
we were
that.
kind of confused, and it was kind of, I would like a little bit of time before you get the rows up to go down for the ones in the back, because you didn't really have time to pray.
no, and that was, again, my mistake. So we'll refine from here. How's that sound?
Yeah, I'm just,
Yeah,
I'm
totally.
not criticizing.
No,
I
that's
don't mean
fine.
it as a
No, that's
I tell
great.
you what I was impressed about, the elders was in charge of the communion service.
Yeah, they stepped right
That's
up.
who it should be.
Yep, so that was good. That was good. So I'm grateful.
Did you bring my beans out?
Yeah. All right, everybody wave bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Very good.
Stay healthy.
Yes, stay safe.
Stay at home if you have.
Yeah, stay home. If you need something, let me know.